Welcome back to this week's episode of Mystery Garage. Now today is the 6th and what I hope to be the final episode of all the work we've put into this Mk2 VR6 Jetta swap. Now in today's episode, as I mentioned in last week's episode, we're going to do a brake upgrade and we got to fix that power steering system. And once that's done, this car should be ready to fire up, test, run through heat cycles, and all that sort of thing. So I'm looking forward, very forward to that. So let's jump into today's episode. Alright, welcome back to today's episode. Now if you're new to the channel and haven't seen this car before, I highly recommend that you go back and watch the first 5 episodes of this car. It came to us as a 1.6 liter turbo diesel. It will soon be leaving as a Mk2 VR6 swapped Jetta coupe, which is pretty cool. We've done a ton of work on this car. Not only have we swapped the engine, transmission, we've done a hydraulic clutch swap, we've done cable shift, O2A cable shift swap, which is standard of this swap. We integrated the exhaust system to what was currently there. This car used to be a diesel, so we did a fuel system, Mk3 fuel system swap. We got underneath the car, put in the Mk3 fuel lines, fuel filter. We're getting into doing a CORRADO 11-inch brake setup in the front, which correlates with obviously our new drive shafts, our new power. We're going to want to be able to stop it. We also went from what was a loop power steering system to now a full power steering system, but the current rack in the car, sorry for the trucks driving by, but the current rack in the car is very, very leaky. So I've already jumped ahead and we'll cut to that time lapse in just a second. I've already pulled out that rack because it's a job that's no fun, but I've already got a jump start on that. So the rack is already out. So let's cut to the time lapse and we'll take a look on the counter. Alright, so what you guys just saw me do in time-lapse was pull out that steering rack. So what I did, just to catch you guys up, is there are 4 bolts that hold the steering rack to this cross member. I undid those 4 bolts. They're actually splined to be held up, so you got to do a little bit of work to pull the bolts down if you're going to take care of it this way. It would have been way nicer to do the steering rack, obviously, when the engine was out. However, I didn't realize that the steering rack leaked so badly, so we have to do it when it's in the car, and again, that's not a fun job, but what you do is undo those 4 bolts. Undo the knuckle from the steering column to the top of the rack, undo the power steering lines obviously, and then what you want to do is undo the 4 bolts from the cross member, and then slowly with the jack lower the cross member. After you've undid the ball joints on each end, so the tie rods on both ends, you can actually pull out the rack from one side or the other. As you slowly lower it down, you'll be able to find your sweet spot where your cross member is low enough that your rack can pull out. I've then pushed the rack back up, threw the bolts back in just to support it, and then threw some these are like RV jacks just to hold it up there while I go ahead and take care of the rack on the counter. All right, so here's a quick look at what we got going on today. Here is the rack that I just pulled out. We're going to be this is the one that's super leaking. I believe it's leaking from this side of the rack, so we're actually going to be pulling off the inner and outer tie rods on both sides, and we're going to be throwing it on this other used rack we have that, from what I understand, is guaranteed not to be leaky. So we're going to go ahead and make that swap those over here, throw this back in the car. Then we got some brand new calipers, 11-inch CORRADO stuff. Then we have some used stuff. These were actually pretty much brand new on an old used car that was parted, and now since then they've got some surface stuff on them. So we're going to kind of clean these up a little bit, but I was told they were brand new when they were picked up, so we just need to do a quick cleanup, and then we're going to do the same thing on these knuckles. There is a difference between the 11-inch knuckles and the factory stuff that came on this car. The carrier that holds your brake pads as well as your caliper on the Mk2 small setup is actually part of the knuckle, whereas in a CORRADO setup, the bigger stuff, it's got a separate carrier. And again, this is all sticking with 4-bolt. We're not going to 5-bolt in this setup. As you can see here, these are all 4-bolt hubs. So we're going to keep with the 4-bolt setup, and we're going to go ahead and get all that in the car. But first I want to take care of this rack, so the rack is out of the way. So I'm going to jump into time lapse. You guys are going to watch me change the inner and outer tie rods. Then we're going to go ahead and do my very best to awkwardly climb back in the car and get this rack back in and all set up. So let's jump into it. Alright, so I went ahead and got this all switched, and I really hope this doesn't leak, but we'll find out. So next off is, rather than putting that steering rack back in with all this stuff in the way, I'm going to go ahead and hop back into time lapse. We're going to blast all this factory stuff off, and on both sides. So we're going to take the calipers, knuckles, obviously the drive shaft nuts, rotors, all that stuff. We're going to pull all of it off. I'm probably just going to actually pull it off mostly in one piece, and then we're going to go ahead and then I'll put the rack back in, because the rack goes right through there, which it doesn't really fit very well. You really got to drop that cross member down, but we'll get that figured out. And then once that's done, then we'll go ahead and throw all the CORRADO stuff on. So let's jump back into time lapse, and away we go. All right, it's update time. So I obviously pulled knuckle off, lower ball joint, undid that. Steering rack still isn't here because I haven't put it in quite yet. I did undo the other brake and then hung the new one just so it didn't leak all over the floor. It's all hooked up. Obviously there's going to be some work to be done to bleed, but we'll deal with that in the future. The goal now is to drop this subframe again and slip the steering rack back in there and then hook it all up while it's kind of down. So this is going to be a bit of a project, but it's easier when everything, you know, when there's no tension on the sway bar and all that kind of stuff, because there's nothing holding it up. So it'll be nicer just to kind of slowly lower it down, and then we can work on everything there. As you can see on the ground here, this is the old knuckle I pulled off, and I know this is dirty, but you can see just how much of a brake difference size that is. It'll cover over the whole thing. So this will work really well with the new power that we now have. Obviously going from a turbo diesel to a VR6 is quite a difference in power. Not sure the difference in torque. I'm sure it's obviously an increase, but I'm not sure the exact numbers, but that's what we're gonna go ahead and do. So next job, you can see over here, I've already started to do a little bit of cleanup on the knuckles. But we're gonna clean these up a little bit more. I'm gonna obviously wire brush them and get them all real nice. We're going to discard these shields, because these shields, a lot of people don't run shields in the front anyways, and these things are pretty toasted. So we're going to clean these up real nice, make sure when we get everything hung, it's looking beautiful. And again, we got to go ahead and throw this power rack in. So let's go ahead and jump to the time lapse, and I'm going to get doing this. And trust me guys, this is a terrible job to do when you don't have a hoist and you're doing it on the floor. But again, This is Mystery Garage. We do everything without the fancy special tools to show you. You can do it all in your garage, all yourself. Let's jump right to it. Quick update. So I got everything for the power steering hooked back up. Power steering rack is now in. I got everything to clean up pretty well. As you saw in the time lapse, I actually painted it up, cleaned everything up. We're all good there. So now it comes time to start hanging everything together. Up top, what do I got going on? I had to tighten a few things, route the power steering lines where they need to go. That's really about it. Again, the rack, changing the rack and stuff, it's not the end-all be-all job, but it's definitely not fun. And it might have seemed like it looked easy in the videos because it's just a lot of grief, getting it to fit right, getting your hands in there to get the bolts and that sort of thing. It was definitely easier with the knuckles undone, I should say that. So because it takes the stress off of the sway bar, it drops a little bit lower than it would if you didn't do that. So I definitely recommend taking that step. However, I would recommend undoing it from the ball joint because that way you're not resetting any of your alignment. Remember, when you're doing any of this stuff, changing, if you're changing coilovers, changing your strut, or you're changing steering stuff, you do need an alignment once this is done. I'm gonna get it within the ballpark that it's gonna be definitely drivable, but it does have to hit an alignment rack at some point in time to be able to be set up, because what you're doing is you're resetting all of this stuff every time you loosen it, right? You have camber adjustment bolts in there, and you wanna make sure that both your camber as well as your toe, because we've farted around a little bit with the rack is different. It is going to set it differently. I may have to loosen this slightly to get it to sit right into the knuckle. So there's things to think about here. You definitely, if you're going to start messing with stuff, same thing with if you're undoing this ball joint from these nuts, you're going to be setting up the, what is that now? Caster? No. Anyway, you're going to be doing a bunch of suspension undoing from what was set up as a, setup alignment. So you are going to have to send this to an alignment rack at some point. But again, you can get it within the ballpark. So it is drivable and enjoyable a little bit, but unless you want to go through a lot of tires or running into a situation where your car might be pushing or your steering might not be set exactly correct, you're going to have to send it to an alignment rack. But enough is enough. Guys, I apologize. I haven't been talking too much. I've been doing a ton of time lapse just because I want to knock this out. It's time to get this car being able to be tested. So we're going to go ahead and hop into time lapse. We're going to throw both knuckles on, assemble all of the brakes, and basically be ready to go. All right, let's do it. All right, we are making some big progress. We got the 11-inch brakes on both fronts. We got the new rack in there. Everything is set up, braided lines, the whole bit. Everything is pretty much ready to go. I do need to fill the power steering fluid, and I hope to God this rack doesn't leak. It's crazy how much work I've put into this car. Honestly, I know more and have touched more on this car than I even have of my own in some cases. Obviously not my VR6 Rabbit, but some of my other cars have definitely done more work on this one than my own. But everything's coming around. First things first, before we get to filling the power steering, I actually want to change out this master. We got a fresh one, a little bit of an upgrade as well. So we're gonna go ahead and throw that in here. I do need to bench bleed it first. Take this one out, bench bleed that one, put it in, and we have to have a whole bleeding program, which is gonna take forever. I don't know how much of that I'm gonna show you guys, but I definitely need to do all that, bleed the fronts. And again, because this is a fresh master as well, I gotta bleed the rears just to make sure there's absolutely no air in any of the lines. Then again, I'm gonna go ahead and bleed that clutch one more time because that thing has been a treat to get bled. It's bled, but it could be better. So I'm gonna probably do that at a later date, but or in the next couple days, I would think. But this car is almost set up to go. The one remaining thing I still haven't done yet is I just gotta, you guys can see in the picture, you can see the ECU just sitting up there. I am gonna hide that, but I was just leaving that for the very last thing we're gonna do. Make sure I get all the testing and everything all done, heat cycles, that kind of thing. And we should be ready pretty quick. So let's not get carried away. Let's keep going. I'm gonna change this master right now, and you guys will watch me do it in the all famous time lapse. You guys can see that. Hopefully you could. I got them all bench bled here. This is the old school way of doing it. You just push it. Then when you're releasing it, you put your fingers over it to suck it in. And then you don't really need any tools or any looped lines to do this. You just fill it, push it, suck with your fingers. And then it's just that motion of doing it will eventually prime them. And now all four shoot, if you can see. So we are bench bled. Now I just need to get it in the car. And there we have it. We got a ton done today. I now have it up in the air, getting ready for a bleed with somebody else in the car. Yes, I did vacuum bleed it with a hand bleeder, but again, I don't take that for granted. I put somebody in the car and then I go around each corner now and we'll go ahead and bleed that all, but I'm gonna leave that for another day. We are set up and ready to go. Power steering is fixed, brakes are upgraded. Everything is bled through vacuum, so we're just gonna get somebody in the car to do the clutch and the brakes when I'm outside the car. We'll go around the car, doing the farthest from the master, and then working our way to the driver's side, which is obviously nearest to the master. And then everything will be bled. We'll go ahead and do the clutch. And then systems are ready to go. I think we're pretty much ready to start testing this car, which is the whole point of today's episode, is to finish up the brake upgrade, get the power steering working. I did go and fill the power steering fluid, so I'm gonna hope in the morning when I come out here, we're not gonna see a leak all over the floor. I should also make mention as well, when I do that bench bleed, the old school method, by plugging it off my fingers, once I do get somebody in the car as well, which I did tonight, I just asked my wife for a few minutes, I treat it like a diesel injection pump. So once I stop at the bench with my fingers, it does get air a little bit back into it. So I get her to hold the pedal and then I crack it, just as if you would a diesel injection pump, just to get the last little squish of air out. And it usually works pretty well. I haven't really ran into too many problems where that hasn't functioned well enough. But that little vacuum bleeder, it works. I would really need to get a power bleeder that I can work with by myself. But for now, I always need somebody else in the car to make this happen, but that's just the way it goes. So I got it set up. I got it set up in the back as well. It's good to point out that you want to put pressure on the beam as if it was on the ground. So I got that set up, and we're ready for a day of bleeding it up, and then we can start testing. All right, so we're gonna call it there. It's been a long night. Sometimes doing this stuff by yourself can get tedious and take a long time, but we got it done. Car is pretty much ready to bleed. Roll it outside, and we can really start doing some heat cycle testing and all that kind of stuff, and then it's ready for a cruise. Really looking forward to that. Guys, thank you for sticking it out with one last episode on getting this car finished, but we have done everything on this car. Engine, transmission, drive shaft, brakes, exhaust system, fuel system, wiring, ECU, everything. This car is pretty much completely gone through, upgraded, cleaned up, and it's really gonna be an awesome driver, and I can't wait to finally get some tests on it. I can assure you the owner really wants to get behind the wheel because he's been watching these episodes just like you guys, and it is time to get him behind the wheel and start driving this car. So thank you very much for watching, guys. If you really like this content, I highly recommend you subscribe to this channel. I would really appreciate it, and it really helps if you guys throw it down a comment to let me know how you think this project is going. At the end of it, I think I'm gonna do a recap and talk about all the little details and kind of go over it one more time with you guys in kind of a rough overview. But thank you very much for watching. Until next time, take care.